We're going to start this time at table 10. And we're going to go up from there. Yes, that was completely random. It's the same as before. We have approximately a half hour. So yes. I'm sorry? Oh, okay, so I can't start with 10? Okay, 11. We're going to use the same format as before where I'm asking you to speak for 2 minutes. I will stand up at 2 minutes. I will try to cut you off at 3 minutes. Okay? All right, let's go.
I'll be done in one. How's that?
I don't appreciate that much.
No problem. Thank you, everybody. My name is Ulysses Gallo. I'm in an excellent group at table 11 in the back on there. So number one, what best practices have been identified in research data management implementations. We talked about DOIs and persistent identifiers as a starting point for discovery. That was important. Training and workshops and education to teach students and researchers about data management and curation, getting them started in the beginning with that, with the aspiring to get researchers talking about data at the beginning of their research versus later. So the idea is trying to shift that way of approach, the way they currently approach research or research data. Number two, how do these best practices address collaboration services? Can't read my handwriting on there. Show researchers that there's value to managing the data, so collaborative services provide that, and the processes and procedures of data management can help institutions improve overall, and researchers overcome challenges. So getting the policies and procedures in place can be helpful for them to see what's in it for them on there. And the benefits to science being achieved, that there's a change in culture for research data management. That would be the ideal. And that researchers have greater transparency and sharing is improved, which is important for funders like NSF out there. So getting that data out there and being transparent would be some of the benefits overall. Am I less than? Oh, I don't have to keep talking. My wife would be happy telling me that I talk too much. Anything else? Yeah, there we go. Thank you.
One was empty. Let's go to table 2.
I'm Jenny Thorson again from the University of Nebraska at table 2. So in many areas we talked about how we currently have practices, but maybe not best practices yet, but we're getting there. We talked about 3 areas of best practice: collaboration and specialization. I know you'll be very surprised to hear that collaboration is really important. We're talking about working together on campus and across campus, and using the different strengths of different entities. So both Boston University and Southern University, they talked about getting different groups together and thinking about discipline-specific curators, making sure you have that sort of expertise when you're working with the different kinds of data. The challenges that this will meet is having better metadata, the data will be easier to reuse, and if you're collaborating, hopefully you're able to keep some costs down. We also talked about usability and value added for all of these different systems, so making sure that we're getting feedback from users so that we're actually building systems that are useful to them and that they actually need, and reduce that mismatch between the built systems and the actual need. And then that meets the challenges of adoptability and making sure that they're actually thinking about the data management throughout the research life cycle, so they're using the systems that are being created. And finally, we talked about portability of metadata and file formats, and making sure that we have exit strategies, so if we do need to move to new systems, we're able to port this data and the metadata as well, and having document specifications, et cetera, so that we can continue to reuse in the future. Of course, this is good for longevity and reproducibility. Some unmet challenges we kind of talked about. Money is important, and research isn't always simple. It can be kind of complex, and it can be hard to meet the different unique needs. And we also had to figure out how to stitch all of these current tools together. Infrastructure is the bridges, as somebody at our table said, between the systems. It's not the systems themselves. And then for benefits of research data management to science, quality control and validation, greater accessibility, and scientists are asking different and new questions as well.
All right, that was table 2. Table 3, this is what I report out.
Hi, I'm Jeff de la Beaujardière from National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration for Table 3. So we identified 3 best practices. We spent a lot of time talking about one of having professionals whose job is data management. And we discussed, finding people with the right skill set and defining roles and talking about training and so forth. Spent a lot of time on that. Another best practice we identified is making the data management steps as simple and automated as possible, so you don't have a lot of extra manual effort you have to learn. And then a third one was emphasizing the benefits and the rewards of good data management rather than focusing on enforcement and punishments. So focusing on carrots rather than sticks, to use the metaphor there. How do these best practices address the major challenges identified earlier in the day? Well, we felt that having professionals identified would address challenges like lack of dedicated persons, wanting institutional acknowledgement of the need for data management, funding needs, so each project doesn't have to do or redo everything itself, continuity of the operations, that having things be simple and automated addresses challenges like lack of time, lack of training, lack of consistency, lack of compliance, and then the benefits and rewards would address challenges of the need for incentives. And then finally, we started talking about the significant benefits to science are being achieved, not necessarily just by these best practices that we mentioned, but just in general. Science is becoming more reproducible. As a result, less need to redo any flawed research. Funding can be used for new science instead of fixing stuff. Data are of higher quality and more reusable when you do the right thing. Open data serves as a check and balance on research, so if you know people might try reproducing your science, you might be a little more careful about doing the right job first. And then the benefit of an institutional solution, a sort of automated built-in solution, means it tends to be freer of politics and funding issues, and if each project needs to kind of fight for their own solution, that might be, incompatible and use additional money. So, thank you.
Elizabeth Long again from University of Chicago. So we started off talking about interoperability, modularization, and standards. So in particular, ICPSR was talking about the things that, I think got covered somewhat in the session that he represented, but really talking about how they have really built things in a way that let them reuse modules that they've built for one archive, for another, and so that being one best practice. And then we got into questions of centralization and coordination on campus, and so several different members there talked about the way in which they either were already centralized or in one case had actually created a project where they actually, we talked about the advantage of having their campus administration, kind of involved in charging them to work between several different IT structures within the campus to really coordinate and understand what they have available, where the gaps are, do the kind of education and outreach. And so we talked a lot about the advantages of having some, amount of centralization or coordination around the IT, and infrastructures. Then we talked about costs, and I'm not sure we exactly came up with best practices there as much as a lot of questions around the need for maybe some best practices with costs, and whether or not there really were, any good ways of pricing storage and some of the challenges of doing that. And then we talked also, as has already been mentioned, about training and workshops. And so one of the interesting things that was mentioned was the creation of some online modules about data management and such, and that this was something that was then being used by faculty who might not otherwise be inclined to come to a workshop to be trained in something, that, a kind of offline ability to do that, on their own was maybe really useful. And then also another strategy being working with new faculty, because you've really got a good captive audience at that point when they're just wanting to find out, what services are available, and that being a great, chance to kind of talk to people. Let's see, how do these address major challenges? So one of the things we talked about was the fact that kind of a clear infrastructure really actually, a kind of clear central infrastructure helps researchers understand how to kind of prepare and maybe even budget for to pay for their storage. We talked about the domain expertise, including that in the staffing, really helping solve some of the problems that were talked about earlier with vocabulary, lack of common vocabulary, and that it really helps if you have the right kind of staff to help support these services. And then in terms of benefits, I think we were looking at especially with some of the modularization, the fact that you end up having much more efficient and cost-effective solutions, and really the kind of time from a need to it being met is so much shorter if you're able to reuse your modules over and over. You're really speeding up the degree to which, the speed at which you can meet science needs. What's that? 4, yes, we need 5.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Ryan. I'm from George Washington University. I represent Table 5, and some of our notes here. Best practices. So we noted that best practices may not be fully implemented. Some of the ideas we came up with involving libraries, establishing a group of people that represent different fields, one place for researchers to get their answers, training programs, which everyone touched on, and then ease of use and ensuring your data management plan is set up before the start of the project. And then some challenges, so everyone's been addressing funding. We noted that's hard to address, and we didn't have an answer for that, but one of the challenges, incentives, so we thought that could be addressed through training programs. Metadata formats, that's another challenge. We thought that could be addressed by a proper data management plan. And then one of the big other challenges, the lack of roadmap, policy, and governance. So establishing a group of people representing different groups across the university, we thought that could be addressed through that. And then our ideas on what significant benefits to science are being achieved. So we said that really these best practices broadens research and allows for the accessibility of data to individuals that are not researchers. One of our teammates brought up the example that possibly high school teachers or others who are not in the field could use the research data. And then, of course, collaboration, researchers spending more time on doing what they're wanting to do, which is their research, and cost savings.
Hi, I'm Dave Kohler from Deepen and representing Table 6. So we were a very heavy IT group, and a lot of our answers kind of focused on that. So on best practices, of course, we hit persistent identifiers. One of the things I haven't heard mentioned is really proper naming of files. Is there a taxonomy in the discipline of how you name the results of your research and how that kind of lessons work throughout the entire enterprise? We noted that it's not widely in practice, but maybe that's something we should look into. We talked about top-level metadata, discipline-specific practices, and we talked a fair amount about standards for sensitive data and how lucky we are that there actually are best practices, so those are more easily identified. And I'll go into that a little bit on the implementation. We also talked about content authenticity and recoverability. So how many copies do you keep, what kind of metadata, and how important checksums are, especially if you have distributed data. How do these best practices address the major challenges? Well, for persistent identifiers, of course, and it helps to enable citation, which is near and dear to everyone. The proper naming of the files is a very local practice, and we didn't identify an actual implementation of that. The discipline-specific practices, we thought, if they're implemented, really enhance reproducibility of that data and the results thereof. Standards for sensitive data. So this was near and dear to us. We had wonderful things that are like NIST 800-53 and 800-171, which luckily are system-level implementations. So if your IT support is implementing these at the system level, that's one less thing for the research group to have to think about. And then content authenticity and recoverability. So making sure that you keep those checksums in some type of immutable storage or separate, and identifying data corruption throughout the research process and trying to replace those data sets or go through that research again. And significant benefits, we pushed back a little bit about on this and said, well, perhaps that the significant benefits are only seen in retrospect. So some of these things that we implement and we start to push forward and become accepted practice, maybe a generation or a few years down the line are seen as significant, but maybe not so much now. We also focused on a systems thinking approach instead of implementing the best practices doggedly, and really thinking about end goals and how that lessens the burden on the researcher in how they implement best practices.
So I'm from Table 7. I'm Jen Zhao from the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute. My title is Ecological Data Manager, but what that really means is talking to the researchers and then making sure the developers know that, okay, they don't really want that really hard version of the software they're actually requesting. They want something easier that you can actually do, and it'll help them. So, so the main points, like, I really like to think about other people involved in research data management, and one of the best practices we kind of thought of was teaching students from the beginning about research data management. There was a psychology professor, one of the people at my table were talking about, that had all their students record activities in a local Git instance. So what they're planning on doing, what they actually did, all the code, and any questions they had for the professor. And that just kind of gives them appreciation of, like recording and just like looking back, maybe you misunderstood something about how you were going to go about your daily activities in the statistical analysis you were planning on doing. And another one was, for the IT people, supporting as many modalities and interfaces as possible. Command line for the developers who are like, I really want to know how this works. I'm going to go ahead and like mess with this, versus the researchers who want a browser-based like graphics, who are like, okay, I just want you to give me things at face value. Give me like, okay, I'm going to do this, make it as easy for me as possible. But for all of those interfaces, make the clients like written in Python and Java, and all the researchers have to do is understand it, and they don't have to do any like minimal effort on their part. And from the very beginning, for any research project, a data management plan, any schema, validation, and incorporate all that into their thinking from the start, or even like having them think about what's in the field and what their data collection looks like. And if you do it from the very beginning, that should going to the major challenges, like if you have them thinking about that from the beginning, that helps with the changing of the culture, making them like realize, oh, this is going to this is gonna actually help me because like later on, I'm not gonna have to answer these questions of like, oh yeah, sure, I forgot to put that in my metadata or my research data. And also putting that into the funding. So if you put, like I wanna do this data management and I'm gonna allocate some funding to it, to data management, to maintenance, and from the very beginning, that will help a little bit with the lack of funding. Like, I tell all my researchers, like, please give me some money so I can tell the developers, hey, this part of the software is broken, like, can you help me fix it? Like, if you just give me, like $1,000, $2,000, like, that little bit from your funding is so much for me to, like, ask for help on the spot. And so, if you get in a bind, I can help you. Other, major, sorry. And then significant benefits to science, like help new players join with the appreciation of research data management. FAIR protocol allows a democratization of science. Anyone has access to data, including citizen scientists, STEM educators, and science competitions. And with more research on we also have more research on latent data, like one person's junk data could be someone else's treasure, and open data breaks down data silos.
I believe table 8 was vacant, so table 9 was, that was what in the past tense, table 9.
Liam from Louisiana State University, representing Table 9. So a lot of these things, I think, has been touched. So identifier and governance. We emphasize that you want to bring all the stakeholders to the same group, but not only for policy, you also want to talk about practices. So both policy and practices. And you want, when you have the faculty members, you want to have a multidisciplinary team so that they could with various domain expertise and responsibilities to provide guidance on the RDMI. Well, incentives, I guess this has been touched as well. So both positive and negative incentives, so carrots and sticks. And it's important to develop a culture of reuse. We identify some domains are more mature in their data management than other disciplines, such as astrophysics. So that this culture, the maturity of data reuse, data management. So that's something that can be learned and borrowed. And I guess. I'm sorry, I forgot, don't know the name. So the people element in it, so the researcher needs to be educated. So basically they kind of plan at the beginning of the project instead of wait until the end, right? And the challenges, I guess, if you have a governance group that address the lack of governance challenge, and also have a governance there probably will help with the lack of, the funding, because you have this centralized RDMI that, everyone can leverage on this to be more cost effective. And then what benefits it can offer to science. When you have long-term science, you have to have good RDM, otherwise it's just impossible to get it done, right? And also, we're forcing the research community to reflect on how we've always done scientific publication, improve how we communicate about science. And also, when RDM best practice in place, this will increase the overall literacy and awareness about the data management, so as a component of probably not just in the academia setup. So in the research, how you have this data component, this is awareness and literacy about it. And the last is, so this also, because of the requirements of the good RDM practices, will require the institutions to rethink how they support their researchers, to reorganize how the IT and everything organized nowadays. So, thank you.
Hi, I'm Stefan Kramer from American University Library, here to summarize the extremely spirited discussion at Table 10. Best practices identified. First of all, the DDI Alliance, DDI being the Data Documentation Initiative, has actually produced a series of best practice documents for applying their metadata standard to data sets. Then DataCite, the DataCite Consortium, has developed a metadata schema that is required to assign DOIs to data sets. Building the infrastructure to support iterative data brings together data from multiple sources. Then we talked about discipline-specific, community-specific best practices. So for example, the XMA portal established best practices for a single discipline. And in the Research Data Alliance, a interest group has identified what was important across different disciplines, from humanities all the way to climate research, for building repositories. And for example, having persistent identifier emerged as being far and away the most important element. Secondly, how do these best practices address the major challenges from earlier in the day? Back to the Data Documentation Initiative Alliance, they actually addressed governance issues of applying metadata to research data sets. The establishment of citation standards for data sets can address the intellectual property concerns of researchers, because their published data becomes cited as a primary research object. And this can also motivate researchers to appreciate and apply metadata standards if they see that as having that value of generating a citation for data. Getting feedback from the community of researchers can generate guidelines and standards and policies. And utilizing, this was mentioned earlier in the day, utilizing statisticians for de-identification of sensitive data. And lastly, benefits to science that are being achieved. The application of standardized metadata enables the discovery and searchability of research data, and assigning DOIs to research data establishes the authenticity of these data sets as being uniquely identified. Establishing the ability to establish trust in research infrastructure can increase the productivity of researchers. Another benefit of the aforementioned metadata is better documentation of data and organization of the data that comes out of research projects that can even make scientific output more effective. Good metadata, again, makes data interpretable by the community, and reusers don't have to rely upon the researchers to explain the data set to them. So that problem that was mentioned earlier about science advancing one funeral and one retirement at a time. Data should be interpretable beyond that. And lastly, this all allows for improvement in methods and protects against natural disasters, having a good infrastructure for data that's distributed geographically. That's it.
I think we all deserve a round of applause. Thank you all. We realize, as we discussed a little bit at lunch, the planning committee, that this was a long day. So thank you all for sticking through the whole thing. I'm really looking forward to tomorrow again, where we have a panel with the funding agencies as well as one more breakout session, and then some time to talk. So I do want to apologize. I know we had some fantastic panels today, and we perhaps didn't have as many questions as we might have wanted, but we're in luck. There's a half-hour cocktail hour as well as a dinner where we all get to see each other and continue these conversations. The cocktail hour starts at 6:30, so you have a few minutes to stretch your legs and thaw out outside. On the agenda, the cocktail hour is in D and E, and to the best of my knowledge, it is still there. If you go there and there's no one there, try A and B. We will start again, if you are on your way out, we will start again at 8. I'm getting a signal. It is going to be in the same place where we ate lunch for the cocktails and dinner. So we will start again in the morning if you are on your way out at 8 a.m. So thank you. Anything else that I need to say, Ben? Ben, Riley? Okay. Thank you all.